Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dynamics Corner, the podcast where we dive deep into all things Microsoft Dynamics. Whether you're a seasoned expert or just starting your journey into the world of Dynamics 365, we'll talk about innovative strategies and a peek into the future with AI integration. I'm your co-host, Kris.
And this is Brad. This episode is recorded on April 29th, 2024. Kris.
Dude.
I am still processing all of the information, and that's all I can say. See,
I know, right?
I don't even know what to say. Today we had a full conversation with one of the chief architect for Business Central, Vincent Nicolas.
Hey guys.
Hello. Hey Vincent, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Very well.
Turn up the volume. All right.
You have to turn up the volume on me. Usually I hear people say they have to turn me down.
No, that's fine. That's okay. Yeah. Hey Kristoffer, can you say something so I can see you right?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Great. I can hear you guys.
Perfect. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. We've been looking forward to this, as I am with every conversation, for quite some time. And I'm thankful to have the opportunity to speak with you.
My pleasure.
If you could, before we jump into it, would you mind telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Vincent Nicolas. I am the Chief Architect for Business Central. I've been in that role for, I think, about 5 years now. I used to work with Business Central platform, the platform itself. And before that, I had a short period working with finance and operation, which back then was called AX. So I was part of release 2012, I believe that was back then. And back then we were doing things with development tools and things like that. And then I moved to Dynamics Nav, as it was called back then, before it was called BC or Business Central. So yeah, that's in few words a little bit of myself. And I've been working on BC ever since.
Well, we're happy that you made the jump, and I'm happy to see that someone made the jump from F&O, AX, FNSCM, whatever the name is.
Finance and operation was I think what it's called these days. Actually the part I worked on now.
I still use Exapta, just to say.
Yeah,
I've been around, so.
It was that says something about how long time you've been around. Everybody use Navision or
Navision,
these words, these names.
That's where I've come to the conclusion of why Microsoft changes the names of things, not just in the ERP space, but also in the entire software space, because M365, O365, Viva, Yammer, Viva Engage, Yammer, they changed the names, Entra ID versus Azure ID or all this, whatever it may be. I can't even keep up, because that's how someone will know how long you've been working with the product. Because if you reference...
that's like, dating.
Dating yourself.
It is. That's where it comes from. So now I just go with the...
We use names.
One thing that I've noticed within the Business Central space is there's a lot of teams. And I appreciate it. There's a lot of wonderful individuals working within the application. And you are the chief architect with Business Central. I know they have other product managers and other, managers of the separate groups. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about what your team specifically does for the Business Central application?
Sure. So my team, we have a relatively small team. But I have some very talented people. I'm fortunate to have some very talented people working in my team and working for me. And so the idea with my team, we have basically three areas we look at, and we use our resources on. The primary goal or charter of the team is to ensure architectural sanity of the product. So it's both short on the short term basis, like we develop new feature, make sure we don't ruin some of the basic principles we have in there. So we're kind of a little bit of gatekeepers, even though it's not most of the time we don't really need to do anything, because we have so many good people working in the team, so we don't have to run around, lifting the fingers like this. So it's not like that. But we kind of have the overall role of maintaining the sanity of the architecture of the product as a whole, and that's our primary function. Then we also spend some time on more innovative initiatives, so looking maybe long term, looking at things, the big changes in the architecture on a long term basis. So how will the product will look like 5 years from now? And I give you an example. When one of the things we did in the last 5 to 10 years to move this product to the cloud. As you know, it didn't used to be a cloud product, and one of the things I said, my goal was to say, this product, we need to change the architecture so it looks like it was born in the cloud. So if you at the very beginning when we started moving to the cloud, obviously we came from a classical 3-tier architecture with a client, server, and database. And if you looked at the architectural product, you clearly could see that it was not a cloud product. And back then it was still today is pretty common today. When you go to the cloud, everybody's talking about microservices architecture. At least that was very 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 hot back then. It's still something that that's relevant these days, but it's certainly not a 3-tier architecture you would go for if you would start to build a product in the cloud these days. So the idea was to bring that product to something that resembled something that was born in the cloud. And actually we made a lot of progress in that area. And I wouldn't say we are there yet, but maybe we are there. We are at a point where it's good enough. And also we still have, we still ship this product in on-prem as an on-prem version. So we're still, and we still have one code base. That was one of the things that was very important for us. We didn't want to split the code, fork the code base in 2 different code bases and have like one on-prem, code base and one cloud code base. So most of the code is common to both releases, and which means there are some things we would do if we were entirely in the cloud, only in the cloud, which we cannot really do because we still have to maintain the on-prem version of the product. So that was the second thing, and then lastly, we as I mentioned, have very talented people working in my team. So when there's a fire, when there's something something burning, then sometimes these people step in and try to help, and try to figure out what's going on.
So you're also part of the quick response team, as I would call it.
You could say that. So it's
the firefighters.
It's all men on it. Yeah. But I mean, we have to be frank, we have many very talented people in our team, not only in my team. So it's not too often we have to do that. But sometimes we pick something and say, okay, there's this, or we discover something ourselves. There's something in the product that requires some, we take a closer look at it, and then we kind of dive deep into some of these things. Yeah,
that is an important task, because with everybody working on the product with the other groups and the other teams, they may not be able to take away from the focus of moving the product forward. So to have that reaction, or the group of people that can react quickly to resolve issues, who also understand the architecture. You had mentioned that the first role of your group is to ensure architectural sanity. When you're referring to architecture, what do you mean? Are you talking on the platform level? Are you talking on the applications, front end software, business level, or in its entirety?
So it's all aspects that you mentioned. So there is, if we want to have some kind of taxonomy around this, I mean, you're right. There is areas on the application. So I have two people in my team who are very Bardu and Gert, who are very proficient, very skilled, and everything that has to do with the app. So they're very knowledgeable of the application. I mean the entire EL source code, and they are working with things like Gert, for example, has been working a lot with componentization of the app. Moving to system app versus base app. This separation we introduced a while ago, and so he's been working a lot with that. Recently, he's been working with the business foundation layer, which is a new layer we're introducing on top of the system app. So these are architectural things around the app. Bardo is working at the moment very much with performance and looking at trying to figure out if we can parallelize some of the processes we have. We have these locking issues, as I'm sure you're familiar with. So it's trying to figure out if we can be more efficient and parallelize some of these things to utilize more the resources we have. And then we have Christian, who works a lot with everything that's to do with the cloud. So he was very instrumental in moving the whole product to the cloud. So that's his area. So we call that the control plane. So these things you don't see. Right? All these bits, all this code base is actually not something you see anything of. This is the machinery that takes care of managing the cloud service. Right? It's only in our cloud, as opposed to what we call the data plane, which is what you basically when you download a preview build, you get the NST and the client, and so these bits they are a part of a on-prem release. So these are more like visible. Then I have somebody like Michael, who's working with a client. So he's very proficient with web technologies. So he's the guy behind the page scripting tool.
I hope that we can talk about that page scripting tool, because I've been waiting
Awesome
for that
feature.
since I saw the preview of it. I think it was 3 years ago or so. Time passes quickly.
And then I have Espen, just to mention everybody, so nobody gets. Espen is our compiler guy. So Espen is is the guy behind the Visual Studio Code and the new compiler. Basically that was the whole move from C-side. So he worked in C-side before, and the whole idea of how we could move gradually from C-side to Visual Studio Code and the newer language was basically mostly his ideas. And the very first version of the compilers was he's doing. So as you can see, I have a lot of talented people working in that team.
There are a lot of talented people working on your team, and also you're articulating and allowing at least me to visualize all of what goes behind the application, because I think from consultants, developers outside of the Microsoft group working to implement it, we see a certain piece of it and may not understand the full architecture behind it. So I appreciate hearing. So maybe there's some understanding of what's involved and the number of pieces and the efforts that are working on it. I like the control plane and data plane reference. And now I guess you could call everybody pilots. So they're pilots for the plane, driving the plane. We will get to the page scripting, because I was excited about that from our conversation before. You had mentioned also the separation of the system, the base, and now the new foundation layer with the number series in 2024, wave 1. Could you talk a little bit more about that separation and why that separation is there and what the benefits may be of that?
Yeah, so with the idea behind, this code base came from, it's has been written over a long period of time, and he has grown to something quite big without. And it's not to blame anybody. That's what happened with old code base. They tend to grow, and if you don't set up some rules about structure and architecture of it, then it just grows, right? So this is kind of an attempt to put some structure on the code base, and in order to make it easier to understand. That's the primary goal, right? And when you do this kind of thing, it's always a hard sell, also to, we have limited resources like everybody, and, that should we spend time on this, or should we spend time on something else? And when you have this feature, which is going to be, immediately visible to the users, end users or end developers, versus this, purely architectural refactoring feature, which doesn't bring immediate value in terms of feature, but just maybe bring the code base to something more, better and simpler and easier to read. It's always a hard sell, right? It's always a hard decision to make in terms of prioritization. So we try to do a little bit of each, right? Not to, we try to move the needle, and my people from my team tend to be on the later, where they tend to work on the more, purely architectural refactoring kind of tasks. So we try to do a little bit of that without sacrificing the more tactical investments. And the ultimate goal is having a code base, which is easier to understand for our partners and developers, but also for ourselves. If the code is best structured, the idea is that implementing new features should be easier. Right? If you have a lot of dependency in your code base, poor structure, then every time you need to do modification to the code base, you need to understand. You spend maybe more time to looking through the code and try to understand. But these are not things which are inherent to BC. It's just a general principle of software engineering that applies to any code base. Talk to anybody who has a relatively large code base; they will tell you the same thing. The hardest thing is to get a newcomer who doesn't know the code base, ask the developer to implement a new feature. If you have to spend 2 weeks understanding the code base, it's not as efficient as it's clearly structured. So getting back to your question, we try to put some kind of a structure. And when you put structure over things, it's good. I think it's good from an architectural standpoint to have some clear definition of why we have that structure. And the system app, the idea behind the system app is to have to factor everything in the code base which has nothing to do with the ERP. So if you look at the things which are in the system app, there are things like mostly APIs to for example, the Azure Key Vault, or the file APIs, HTTP request API, all these things which are, platformish things, and they don't relate to ERP as such. They could be, if you look at the .NET C# framework, it has APIs like this as well. Even though C# has nothing to do with ERP. So any development framework has something to do to help you do a REST call, and to do file access, to do Azure services access. So this is basically the idea behind the system app. And I think we've done a pretty good job at putting everything down there. So there's no remaining pieces which are in the base app, which should be down there. I think we're in pretty good shape there. Now, the next idea with the business foundation was to try to factor out everything which you would need in an ERP system, but which are not specific to an area of ERP, if that makes sense. And so number series is a good example. But as soon as you talk about things like finance or warehouse management or inventory management, these don't belong to the business foundation. If they, does it make
Yep.
sense?
It makes sense. I appreciate this explanation.
Numbers theory is good, no matter which area you're in. But as soon as you start talking about finance related, objects and tables, or HR, or this kind of thing, then they should belong to their own module. That's kind of the idea here. And with that, we hope that we could maybe at some stage. So right now the system app is kind of locked for customization, at least in the cloud. You can only extend it. It's basically locked for customization. But we kind of hope we can lock more and more of the code base to prevent what we believe are unnecessary customization. Right? I mean, nobody should have to modify anything in the HTTP requests, API of the app. Right? I mean, it just need to have the API you need, and that's it. That should be something. That should be something people go and customize.
Yeah, Vincent, you talked about simplifying the architecture. When you are putting new features, is there a lot of considerations? Business Central there's a lot of integration happening with other Microsoft products. Is there a lot of do you take a lot of that into consideration when you're architecting? How could this work with other products when you're setting this up or bringing new ideas in? How's that taken into consideration?
Yeah, we always try to. So when we make these kind of changes, we always keep in mind. There's two things we keep in mind, right? The very first priority is to try to be non-breaking for you guys, and avoid breaking change as much as possible. And if we cannot avoid it, to be as little breaking as possible. Because for several reasons. So first of all, anything we do which is non-breaking, we can potentially ship in a minor release. So it come out sooner, which is always good for everybody. Because if there are bugs, we catch them earlier, and if it's good, if it's all good, people get benefit of it earlier. And also having this major release. There's always a bulk of features that come out at the same time, which makes it always a little more risky. And there's always more risk that the more you change, the more risk there is that you broke something, obviously, right? And if you just can release things on a continuous basis, it's much better in terms of engineering, because first of all, you can roll it back. It's easier to roll it back. If there's a problem, the delta is a lot smaller, so it's easier to identify what changed, right? If you issue a minor release and you only change 3 things and there's something broken, then it can be only one of the 3, right? As opposed to a major release, we change maybe 100 things, and it's maybe a little harder to figure out where the problem comes from. So we strive to release as much as we can on a continuous basis. And I said it was 2 things, right? And the other thing is we want to make it easier for you. You were asking about other Microsoft products. So we try to make it as easy as possible to integrate with other Microsoft products. For example, we've been releasing now everybody's talking about AI, and that's the very hot
I've never heard that word.
I'm sure you've heard a little bit of it. If you haven't, you're probably living under a stone. Yeah. So we released, for example, an AI toolkit as part of the system app, which kind of simplifies some of the things you need to do to implement some AI-based feature, LLM-based feature. By the way, when people say AI these days, they mean LLM mostly.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a lot of confusion about the terminology, but So that's probably a topic for an entire podcast.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we can have a conversation
We can
about
talk about it if you want. Yeah,
Copilot.
sure.
I do want to jump back momentarily. I do appreciate your explanation of the difference between the system app, the base app, and the new foundation layer, because I've had conversations and I do believe there's some confusion, not by the messaging, but your simplification of the system app being non-ERP functions, the base app being the core ERP functional areas, and the foundation layer are ERP centric functions that are not tied to a specific area. So that way there's like a common library. So you almost have your low level system calls, which you had mentioned for your APIs, your AI, and other integrations. Your foundation layer would be your library, in essence, of utilities or tools such as the number series. And then the base app would be broken down. I greatly appreciate the namespaces and the separation of the files. I have been around a long time, and I knew all the numbers. On a whole side note, I know we've had conversations with Stefan before about names versus numbers of objects, but breaking it down where in namespaces now where everything's grouped together makes things a lot easier to find. At first, it's a little difficult for the old timers, but for everybody else, it's a little bit
So
nicer.
that was Espen, by the way. That was Espen's work mostly.
Oh, excellent. Well, we have to thank him. And it's...
Well, I mean, he's not alone, but I mean, he's, he started the whole, even he's Mr. Compiler, he's done some of the first prototyping with namespaces. But there was a lot of, so he did the compiler work, and then Alexander Yakunin from the base app did most of the work to, as you can imagine, we had to namespace our entire code base. And Alexander did a tremendous job in setting up the structure, and there was a lot of internal discussions around this. It's a little bit like religion. Some people believe this object should belong to this area, where this object should belong to this other area. But we had somehow. So the thing was, if you want to hear a little more about it, we're digressing a little bit, but I hope that's okay. So we had we had kind of if we wanted to release the compiler namespace feature, right? And the problem was that so the way we build it, in order to be non-breaking, back to what we were talking about just before, in order to be non-breaking, so the way it is today, and I'm sure is that if you don't adopt namespace, if you don't use namespace in your file, actually it's at the file label, right? Then even though you reference something which is namespaced, it doesn't matter. You don't need to qualify your objects with namespacing, because you've kind of made the decision, I don't want to use namespace. That means all the extensions we have out there, all the solutions that are built on top of the base app, if they don't change anything in the code, and some of the extension underneath start using namespace, they don't get broken. Everything compiled. So that what the compiler does basically is that it says, I'm not using namespace, therefore everything which is namespaced on it is ended up in this big namespace, area, which exactly like it was before. It ends up in a global namespace. But as soon as you start using namespace, then you need to start referencing, the objects you're dependent on with, either with the using statements or fully qualifying with, Microsoft dot, finance dot something. And so if we release the namespace feature in the compiler without having our base app fully qualified, and then people start using namespace, they would reference our base app, which was not namespaced, and if we namespace it later on, they will be totally broken. We would work like everybody, more or less. Everybody would start using namespace. So that was kind of not a really good plan. So we had to, there was kind of a catch-22. We had to release the compiler feature and the base app namespace at the same time, right? So we kind of didn't break anybody, and we managed. And I was kind of, there was a lot of work, a lot of files, and a lot of discussions about how we should structure it. So we settled for what we have now, and we'll be happy to hear some feedback about it. But it was more, our intention was say, okay, let's come out with something. Let's make it as good as possible. When we touch so many files, it's hard to get it right the first time, but we try to get it as right as possible. And then we'll change. If we have to move that object from here to there in a major release, yes, that's going to be breaking, but it's like one file, or two. That was basically lost.
That's such a bad word, breaking change. To this day, I have some breaking changes that are lingering that I can't make, and I'm hesitant to do an upgrade to move it to another table. But that's a discussion for another time. But you highlighted something that is important. It's the management of an application that's widely used internationally, adding features that don't all of a sudden break everything, because there are a lot of internal developers at organizations as well as partners worldwide that develop apps and PTE solutions for customers, that if a new feature is added, if the person who created that extension, whichever source it is, hasn't had the opportunity to update it, you have a mess. So I would love to listen to some of those conversations, because I can imagine someone go, "We just have to get this done. Let's just get it done. Who cares? Let's just go through it." But the careful thought of moving something such as, like you had mentioned, namespaces, to at this point now, if individuals start using the namespaces, it becomes near permanent, because now to move it, all of those extensions that reference it also need to be updated, and it's not a flip of a switch in an overnight type thing. So
absolutely, these kind of changes are, they have we fully aware of the fact that it has kind of a very huge impact on the community potentially. So can be really, we only live through our partner channels, so we need to be very careful when we do these things, that we don't kill anybody's business.
Yes, no, I can imagine. One thing that you also mentioned, you alluded to, I will jump to it quickly. I've been holding on to, is the page scripting tool. That by far, a lot of new features are released with every wave. As you had mentioned, there's a lot of changes, not only to the core application as far as functionality. The development tools are enhanced, and the functionality within the application are enhanced. And then also, even now, Copilot, that AI thing that everybody's talking about. I'm curious to know how many people really understand it, but that's another thing.
We can talk about that later. We need to talk about that in this podcast, because there's a lot to be said about it.
Oh, we will talk about that. We will talk about that.
Let's get back to it later. Yeah.
Yes. No, I have that down here that I want to talk. I would like to talk about AI, the AI toolkit, and also Copilot, because even the other day I walked through a lot of the features in demonstration form of all the new Copilot features. But let's talk about the page scripting tool. I understand. I personally understand, the whole MVP. Get a product out there, start soliciting feedback. You have to get a first version out there. It's not perfect. But this page scripting tool, I can see so much happening with that, not only from the training point of view, from the testing point of view.
It's a project management tool is the way I saw it. I think it'd help a lot of people. It's going to help a lot of people.
Yes. So where did the page scripting tool come from? What is its intended use, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because we have a lot of internal discussions about it as well. We have had an idea for a while, and that was something we kind of had on the drawing board, so to speak, and we had some ideas on how to do it. So the thing is that F&O has something that resembles that, and it can do a lot of things, and people use it with success. But what was our intention with the page scripting was, we got back to the minor release cycle discussions we just had before. A lot of people are complaining about us putting out versions too often, and especially some customers need to run, or feel the need to run some acceptance tests when we issue a minor release, right? Even though there's very little changes, they felt like that they have to run. And some industry it's mandatory for compliance reasons. For example, the medical industry or other industries have very strict requirements. When each time they adopt a new software version, so you do have to run some kind of acceptance test. And these tests are usually run by end users, and they are run so customers, right? And they usually run manually. And most of the time they don't catch anything. They just need to reassure people that nothing is broken. Right? And what we heard from many of our partners was that that was basically the long pole. Right? They everything on there, and everything was done. They did whatever they need to do, because there's very little that needs to be done when it's a minor version in principle. You shouldn't have to recompile anything. Everything should be backward compatible. But then they're waiting for the users to run acceptance tests, usually in sandboxes before they actually can give the green light for a new minor. So the idea there was to address that particular thing and provide a tool which would be built in the product, so it doesn't require any installation of some third party or some something that you would need to install next to BC. So it was to be built in BC, and should be easy to use. To be the end user, we're targeting end users, and it also should be quite robust over customizations, for example, because there's a lot of tools out there, commercial tool, even probably some. I'm guessing some free ones or open source ones, which can do record and replay of on website and in the browser. But we know from experience, we've played around with these tools ourselves, that are usually very fragile in terms of how the HTML structure typically is within the page, and they have various degree of these tools have various degrees of maturity and complexity. But usually they demo very well. You can, you take a page, let's say Business Central, you go and record some scenario, and then run the scenario, and everything is fine, right? But as soon as, for example, somebody let's say you have an extension that has a field somewhere, that changed the whole internal HTML structure of the page that gets generated, and then the test is broken, right? Some of them, some of them, the way, for example, I don't know how technical you want me to go on this, but some of them, they go and select. There are various ways to select. Basically, it comes down to how they select the HTML elements on the page, right? How you recognize them, right? And some of them use, ideas. If you have some ideas there, but again, there's no guarantee we will preserve these ideas. Some of them use some kind of path in the DOM structure. There are various ways to do that. But the long story short, none of these are very stable, and they are very fragile for any change. On the other hand, there are companies that do tools like this, which have been at it for many years, so they have some amazing capabilities. But these problems remain. So what we can do in BC is that we know, from the platform side, we know how the pages are structured, right? We know how we build the pages, right? This is the internal rendering engine of BC. We know it very, very well. So the idea was to actually use that capability, use the fact that we can go, under the hood and behind the scenes, and the way we actually identify elements on the page is actually, you could think of it as an AL path. Like, for example, you have a page. It has a name, right, which comes from AL, right? And it has then there's a field which is in a group somewhere, and it has a name as well, and so we can kind of build a path that represents basically the element of the page, right? And that's very robust, because unless you change the name, the L name, in your code, whatever extension you add, or it will still work. So a great demo of when we demo, for example, the page scripting, one of the things we do is that we demo it we do recording, and we show where it works. You can replay it, and then we switch to the mobile or tablet mode, which is a totally different HTML layout, right? Same page, and you can run the exact same recording, and that will work. Even though the HTML is rendered totally differently, but the AL names and the way the page is structured underneath is still the same. We can still, find the elements and read the content of it and do all these things that we do in the page script. So that was about what we can do is now that said, the limitation of it has limitations. So we can only test true BC pages. Like, for example, if you have a client add-in, like a JavaScript add-in on your page, we have no visibility. That's like a black box for the page script. We can't go, if you do your own custom add-in, client add-in, you can't go and test anything on that. Right? That's one major limitation of it. You cannot use it to test end-to-end scenarios with other products. So across multiple blogs, let's say you have, I don't know, some approval scenario where you have a mail coming in Outlook and you want to verify that that mail comes actually in Outlook, then you can't do that. But then there are other products out there which can do that. So you can combine the page scripting tools to do anything you want to do in BC with some of these products actually, and run only the subsets you want to run within BC with the page script.
I understand. So with the page scripting, it doesn't, I'm a big advocate of automated testing, and that's what I talk about frequently at some of these conferences. With the page scripting tool as it stands now, it doesn't require development. It's any person can sit down and start scripting through a scenario. Yes. And I have used it a bit when preview came out, as well as now, not as much as I would hope to with time constraints with the existing application. So I do have some questions with it, and also maybe where it's going. The page scripting tool, you can save these scripts and import them and export them to different environments, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Can you put them together in a sense? So we'll go with a creation of a customer, then followed immediately creation of a customer, creation of a sales order, and posting of a sales order, so you can chain multiple areas together?
Yes, you can do blocks of recordings that you can put together. That's one of the requirements. So we tested it internally. We have actually, we have vendors we hired to run some of the tests on our product on every release, and we tested internally, and we asked them to use the tool to get very early feedback. And that's one of the first things they asked for. They asked for the very early version, before we shipped it. Didn't have the capability. So one of the first things that Michael implemented, the ability to build blocks exactly as you mentioned. So they would be able to reuse some, as you say, customer creation or some of the obvious things you would need for testing, and you can put them together.
And with it, and I didn't get to play with it too much. I did read about it. I used it in its simplistic form at this point, to be candid. You can have conditional steps in as well, which is amazing. What about variability? One of the common problems that I see with testing is if you ask a user to test or someone to test, when they enter a sales order, they always pick item number 1,000 for a quantity of 5 from location blue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a problem which is common to all these scripting tools, right? Recording tools, where you'll have you'll be very soon when you record your scenario, you'll have some idea somewhere or something that's counting up, and then next time you run it, it's going to break because this particular value has been incremented, right? So you have actually the ability to do some. You can do different things to address that. So you can write simple expressions. So for example, let's say you run a test and you want to verify that that particular number is something, right? And then next time that number will be incremented by 1. So let's say you want to test that. So you can write an expression that takes like the previous let's say it's a running number or some some invoice or something, right? So you can go and copy the version, the particular field. So there's like a clipboard thing that runs within the page scripting. You can go and copy a particular value, and then you can go and when you want to test write your condition for whether your test pass or fail. You can go and take the value of the clipboard and say +1. Right? So you can write simple expression like this, right? And verify that the new value is the old value, like say for the previous invoice, +1. You can do something like that. You can write a more complex expression. Actually, the language, the expression language we support is PowerFX. So you can write actually more advanced expressions in this conditional thing. Yeah, so that's one way to handle it.
Demo.
I see so many uses for this. As I had even mentioned,
give me the template. Say demo.
Demos will be it's self-paced or self-run demos would be one. I could see it also being used for creating training materials or user materials, as I had mentioned. It's now if you could, which goes to the next portion of it, is the data from the script accessible to external tools? Meaning, from a development point of view, could I use the page scripting tool? I know within automated testing, we can, have page tests. We can have, a lot of the automated tests for the individual methods, and we have different libraries that we can utilize. Will or is the page scripting tool accessible to the AL development language?
So two things I want to say to answer your question. So first of all, so you're saying, we've heard that, the first one, I'm saying, there's so many possibilities for that. I just want to, come with a word of caution about this. So we're very well aware that there's, you can potentially use this for demos, for troubleshooting, for, all sorts of things. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities around this. Our official supporter scenario is end user acceptance testing. Now, you can go and use it for, if you find if you find useful to use it, for example, troubleshooting or for demoing or for, automating some tasks, feel free. We're not going to prevent that, obviously, but we're only supporting end user because, there is, when you go into these areas, I'm not saying we will never support these scenarios. I'm just saying when we'll do it properly. So we make sure that, let's say we want to advertise it as a tool for troubleshooting, say. Then we'll make sure we cover the scenarios properly, so you can do proper troubleshooting with it. Right? I'm not saying you shouldn't do it now. I'm just saying we haven't looked at it with this with this optic. That makes sense?
I understand completely, and it's something that I use. Your statement, it does express how I'll also say something we can jump into with AI. I think it's using a tool to complete the job that's the appropriate tool. Meaning a carpenter, when he builds a house, may use a hammer and a nail, or he may use an air gun, or may use a screwdriver. They all do a specific function, but trying to have a screwdriver work as a hammer or a hammer work as a screwdriver, can it work or may it not work? It's the responsibility of whomever is building whatever they're building to make sure that they're using the right tool and not blame the tool if they're not using it the right way, if you follow what I'm saying.
But I mean, please give us that. I mean, start using it. Start using it I believe, as MVPs, you also have the opportunity to give us some feedback and use it in some. You guys are usually good at finding all sorts of interesting ways to use the product. So I would very much like to hear your feedback, and if you want to use it for other things, and give us, say, hey, when I try to use it for, say, troubleshooting, there's this and that feature that I'm missing. We would very much like to hear about it.
I will provide some feedback. I do have some plans to use it to create some tests for something that I'm working on over the next week or so. And that was one of the intentions I wanted to see about using it instead of automated tests. Not to say that automated tests aren't appropriate. at all. But I think in this case, for the design and the scenarios that I needed to have acceptance on, the page scripting tool may be the tool to use.
That's what it's made for. Now back to your second part of your question was about using it from AL. So we got that request or reaction many times. You're not the first one asking about it. So we've no plan on making it accessible from AL, and I don't think we'll ever will, because again, back to it's an end user tool. That's reason number one, and also there is other ways. We have other, as you mentioned, there's other frameworks for doing testing from AL. There are a lot of things you can do in AL that you cannot do with page scripting, and that's how it is for now. So we don't know. People have asked us, can I do recording and convert it to AL from the YAML, because I don't know how much you've played with it, but we kind of generate a YAML file underneath our YAML structure, which you can get. And but if somebody in the community should get this idea of writing a tool that converts the YAML to AL, I mean, where are we to prevent that?
No, well, it's when you have a wide base such as the application from the use and the development, you will have individuals that will push the boundaries, which is good, because this is
fine.
It brings innovation and also solidifies the product to make sure that it's a higher quality product for all that use it. So I appreciate that.
But we don't just the YAML format is you can't rely on it though. We might change it. We're still in previews. Just sorry, Kristoffer, you were saying.
No, I was saying it. I think this tool specifically, it's certainly solving a big problem when it comes to implementing Business Central, because usually a lot of times it's the adoption component right when you're going to closer to go live, and this tool will certainly simplify users adopting to the product, because it kind of leaves it more open to the end user to not only to create their own documentation, which, by the way, it's a big problem with a lot of end users that are implementing. They documentation is usually the last part, or at least sort of a walkthrough. This right here is certainly helping some of our team members I'm working with start putting this part of their project timeline, or part of their project tools they're going to be utilizing. So we do appreciate that the focus is really for the end user. In terms of from the functional consultant side, it's just another tool for us to kind of help alleviate some of those challenges that an end user would typically have with documentation and kind of a walkthrough. So we appreciate this tool. I appreciate this tool very much.
I appreciate everything with every release. Before we talk about AI, you mentioned that your team is responsible for ensuring the architectural sanity, innovation, and also what many refer to firefighting. Are you able to share any of your firefighting experiences with us?
Sure. I mean, I think I mentioned that to you earlier. We have all sorts of. Usually, it's about performance. Often it's about performance.
I never heard that complaint in my life.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard because, to be honest, we have a bunch of internal tests, obviously, that we run, and we try to catch regression as much as we can. But you have to imagine that when we run a cloud product like ours, we have hundreds and thousands of users simultaneously in all sorts of configurations. So we one of the basic challenge we have is that we don't know the code that is running out there, as opposed to a non-customizable product, right? Meaning, like, even some of the most advanced services, I'm not. It's not to make unreasonable comparison, but take something like take a service that is very very good at scaling, something like Netflix, for example. Right? So nobody, so the code that's running out there in their cloud is, I mean, they know every line of it. Nobody is customizing Netflix with some weird, extension that does something funny, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
we have, for practically every cluster we run, we have a unique combination of our own Bas App plus, some ISV solution typically of some kind, and then a bunch of extensions, third-party extensions on top of it, and maybe some PT extensions written by, some consultant out there. So we have, you can imagine all the combination we have out there. So we don't know. And the challenge, how do you make a service like this run at scale and have it perform at all time, right? So it's just to kind of set the stage around what we're dealing with here, right? We have a bunch of tools that can help. We're trying to, so first we have this philosophy. We're trying to help the partner to help themselves. So we have things like, the performance profiler, in-client performance profiler that will tell you, which extension is actually, you can, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but, you turn it on and then you run your scenario and you can see which extension actually, which function and in which extension is time spent, right? So it can help you diagnose sort of performance thing. But so getting back to your question, one of the firefighting we had a while ago was we heard from customers complaining about performance of the product, and what they were saying was that the PC was basically freezing, and for a long period of time. So you can have a little bit of freeze sometime if something is going on, and then you're waiting for the request from the browser to return. And depending how busy the system is, you can have a little bit. They were talking about 30 seconds, which is kind of,
That's a long time to wait.
A long time.
Yeah.
That's basically, above the threshold of where people lose their patience, even for, something that is supposed to take a long time, right? And even for simple operations, they would just click on something, open a customer page or something, and then there was not really any pattern in that, which was even harder for us to figure out, because it was not sometimes you have this scenario, people run a specific scenario and then it's very, very slow, and then it turns out somebody installed an extension that does something, or it can be a bug in our code, of course, obviously, but they run this scenario, and then when they click submit or whatever, then it takes forever, and then it's just you can start the client profiler and you can go and debug it and figure out where in AL, most DL most of the time, right? But then and this one, there was not really a pattern, and people, it was happening, it was working fine for a while, and all of a sudden this was happening, long pauses, and we look at our telemetry, and we have a lot of telemetry. We track the use, the response time from the browser, among many other things, and we couldn't see anything, and then until what helped us a lot is one of these customers actually sent us a video. So they took a recording of they were actually able to catch this freeze. So they sent us a video which we could see that the browser was freezing, but what was even better is that we could see the exact timestamp, the exact date and timestamp when that was happening. So that means we could go in our telemetry, and because otherwise a little bit of needle in a haystack. We have millions and millions of data points on telemetry, so it's very hard to catch something like this. But we know exactly, the 30 seconds where that happening. We were able to, and we knew which environment it was, so we could go to that particular, telemetry for that particular environment and that particular client session, and find out what was going on. And then after a lot of, investigation, we had a suspicion that it was the garbage collector that was triggering. And because when that happened, the whole machine is busy cleaning up the memory, and you can't even emit telemetry, which explains why we didn't see anything in our telemetry, right? So basically the whole machine is frozen. because the .NET framework takes over, and the .NET runtime takes over and say, hey, you have to clean up memory, I'll be back when everything is done, and then but normally, so that happens when you run a .NET process. That happens on a regular basis, and normally you don't see it, you don't feel it, unless you run, you use a lot of memory, and you have to do a lot of cleanup, right? So now, so that's kind of, so we're starting doing a more in-depth analysis, which consists of basically taking some snapshot of the memory and how it looks like, and to see what objects are instantiated in memory. And what we could see was that, so there's, I don't know how much you know about the garbage collection, but actually it's very advanced. And people who are making this garbage collector are very, very smart. And they are like, we talk about, so when you have objects in the memory, we talk about generation, the generation 1 and 2, and then there's large object. And if you have large object, they end up something called large object heap, which is basically, typically handled in a different cycle in cleaning up, because they're usually expensive to clean up. So they're not cleaned up that often. Well, it's a little bit complex, right? It really is a science, right? But what we can see is that this. So normally, there's nothing wrong in using a lot of memory. And then normally would happen, normal cycle, I oversimplify obviously, the normal cycle of garbage collector is that you use some memory, and then when the machine is starting to run a certain threshold, running out of memory, then the garbage collector kicks in and basically collects garbage, clean up all the objects which are not used, right? And that should free up some memory. But what we can see was happening was that the garbage collector was doing this cleaning, but it wasn't cleaning up that much, right? Meaning that short time after, it would be triggered again, and then because it hasn't cleaned up a lot, then it would go through the whole thing again, right? And then we would have these freezes, right? But normally the garbage collector are more intelligent. They figure out that the last time they did the cleanup, they couldn't clean that much up, because all the objects are in use, right? PC is using a lot of memory, and we have a lot of things in use. So they go through these large objects and look at it and say, okay, it's still in use by the application, so we just let it be. But then when you do the next cycle, you should be trying to clean it up again, right? But that's what the garbage collector was doing. So it took us a while to figure that out, And then, but then what we could see basically was that there was something. So the garbage collector, they run by themselves. They are their own algorithm, right? And when they should be running, right? But you can also trigger it yourself. Like if you want, like from your own application, you can say, hey, go and clean up, right? And then we could see that some of these garbage collections, they were triggered, by BC, right? And then we look at our code, and we are triggering some garbage collection, but not that often, and not like that. And then we finally tracked it down to so the reporting engine, which is actually a third-party control. It's not ours. It's not BC. It's a Microsoft component, but it's not ours in the BC team, right? It was actually triggering. So this component was triggering garbage collection more than it should. So that was basically the reason of this, and we alleviated so we couldn't rewrite that code because it's not ours. It's third party. It's like a first party component from Microsoft. But what we did is that we put it in a separate process, and that kind of solved the problem, prevented. So basically, the garbage collection for the BC, basically the NST process could be a bit more efficient and wouldn't trigger these freezes. Right?
That's fascinating.
It is. It just goes to demonstrate some of the challenges you have with the application, then to come down to have it be, again, as you'd mentioned, it's a first party control for Microsoft, third party for you, because your group is not responsible for developing it, rather they use it as a control.
And by the way, that was really learning. That was very learning experience also for us, because we kind of not that we didn't know that, but we kind of we know that the NST is using a lot of memory. But then going through this whole process, we did a very in-depth analysis of how the memory was used, and we got tons of ideas on how we could optimize that. So that was, we were in fighting mode. So we choose a solution and mitigated that particular problem. But we got all sorts of, we basically got a whole catalog of ideas of things we could do to optimize the utilization of memory for the product. And we'll get to it eventually. We have that list now, and it's basically on the drawing board. And we are doing some of it in the next iteration. It's mostly about optimizing how the metadata is deployed in memory. And so it's basically the big memory consumption comes from metadata instantiation.
It's the first time I've heard a garbage collector, particularly in BC.
Sorry?
Particularly in BC. Is that also true for on-prem? The same thing?
Yeah, that's the same thing. But so, well, you'll be less prone to these kind of problems on-prem, because so first of all, we're talking about .NET garbage collection, right? You know that ultimately and when I'm talking about objects in the garbage, these are .NET objects, right? But all the AL objects, they get transpiled, as I'm sure you know, to C#, which eventually gets transpiled to IL code. So this is all .NET, right? In the end. But the thing is that, so what happens with the memory consumption on-prem installation is usually a little less, because, so first of all, you don't have as much metadata than typically you would have in a cluster, because
makes sense.
Especially if you're not multi-tenant.
Makes sense, yeah.
If you're running a regular installation where you have, say, an ISV solution and a few extensions on it, then you won't run into these problems, provided you have a good server with good memory. That's fine. But the problem we have is that in the cloud we have the NST we run, they're running multi-tenant mode, meaning they're servicing different tenants with different configuration and combinations of extensions. And for each combination, we deploy an entirely new memory representation of the metadata, which is very memory consuming, right? So we have that's one of the things we have on the drawing board. One of the plan is to, we want to do something we only handle deltas. Like, the Bas App is the Bas App. So you don't need to duplicate all the Bas App metadata just because you have a different extension combination, right? So there are things like that we're looking at for the future, right? But these are big changes, and it's kind of open heart surgery, so we have to be very careful with that.
It is. I'm getting excited
So
because
fascinating.
I could imagine being able to work on these teams to come up with one, troubleshooting and solving these issues, but also determining and designing and planning some of the new features to it. Just as a short moment that I thought about when you were saying that, this is Business Central Under the Hood, which is a series that you also started. There's a few episodes out that I enjoyed on YouTube that talks about Business Central Under the Hood.
Yeah, exactly. So I love to talk about these things, first of all. That's as I'm sure you can tell by now.
Oh, I could listen to it all day.
But also, we publish a lot of videos around the product new features and new developments in the launch events we have. And so that's one end of the spectrum. You say we show you what's new in the product, in the latest release. And then we have some developer conference where we talk about, and we have some talks about also at directions and take place in a conference like this where we talk about development tools and what's new in AL and this kind of thing. And then I realized that I got a lot of questions and people were interested about, about the inner workings of BC, how the product works. Not necessarily just out of curiosity. A lot of people came to me and asked me, "Hey, how do you handle that many users in the cloud, or how does the compiler work?" Or this kind of questions, which are, So I thought maybe there was an interest for it. So I decided to start this series as an experiment, where we basically it's also kind of a podcast style, where we talk about the inner workings of BC, and we have so we kind of try this out and see if people are interested in hearing about this. So far we've published two videos, and we have one which is produced we'll publish next week, actually, I think. And so the first one we talk about AI, and how and we can talk about it in a moment, but how difficult it is to develop AI and more specifically LLM related features. And then the second one is about the inner working of the EL compiler. And then we have a third one in the pipeline, which is talking about how we handle many users in the cloud. And I have a long list of ideas of what we can talk
I have
about.
to think of some ideas to send over to you too, because I like the idea of understanding. I think also the transparency and sharing the information also shows the effort of what's behind the application, and maybe some of the thought behind it. I know if some using it, they expect it to work a certain way or whatnot, but if they have an understanding of it, maybe.
I mean, I'm hoping it can also help to some extent, especially maybe your developer community, but maybe also people who are working as solution architect roles in our partner channel, can help them get a better understanding. I mean, you don't necessarily need to talk about this with their customers, or you don't necessarily need to know about the inner working of control plane, for example, to talk about how cloud machinery works to be a successful developer in BC. But I'm just maybe just having that knowledge can be useful. I hope.
I think it can help implement a solution. I mean, there's different scale sizes. Just to understanding the inner workings of it is helpful. And you had mentioned the first one's on AI. I had this. I mentioned this several episodes ago, and I go back to the early days of Navision, when it first, even back when they had 3 separate versions. I don't know if anybody remembers this. When they had the financials, they had distribution, they had manufacturing. And then ultimately they combined them all. I think it was around 2.5 or 2.6. I forget the versions. I'm getting a little bit older. But that's also, once you started the application, there was a question: which type of company are you? And you did this, and it set up a whole bunch of information. I said this, I think, Kris, about a year or so ago. I forget where we talked about, and that's where I see this going. I see it where I sit down, I open up Business Central, answer a few questions, or guided questions, and now my Business Central set up. I'm oversimplifying it, of course.
It'll get you like 80% there, right?
Almost like rapid start. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you really want to talk about? We'll put rapid start on the AI. So this is a form of rapid start for AI for Business Central, but I could see how that could be useful, Kris. To your point, it's because there are a lot of setup pages, I guess you could call it. That's the other thing that I put for an idea that nobody likes, but we need like one setup pane, like make a configuration that you can get to and has all the setup pages on it so that I can just go to one place. But that's a side note for an idea. Write it down. To make it easier, but to where you could have a guide to go through a lot of these setups, because with the product changing so quickly and so rapidly, and a lot of features and functionality being added to it, it may not always be easy to determine which setting to use on the inventory setup versus on general ledger setup versus sales and receivables setup. Again, I saw the contribution from Dimitri for the number series, adding and creating number series. And I've seen some other nifty peer-reviewed tools to create some of this stuff. But that's kind of where I see this going. I just regurgitated my thoughts. But with AI, let's jump into the AI, Copilot, LLM, whatever we want to call it, within Business Central now. A lot of updates, and it started with the marketing text on the items several versions ago, bank, late payment predictor. And now with this release, everything, it seems to me, with it.
So actually, you mentioned, AI, you say LLM, AI, LLM Copilot. I have a slide, maybe I can share it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of confusion about this terminology. And I think maybe it's worth trying to kind of explain a little bit about that. So how do I do that?
There should be a share at the bottom of the window.
Yep. Give me a second. All right. Yeah. Okay. If I share my screen on multiple screen, maybe it's going to be a little bit. Let's try that. Let's see how that works.
Okay.
I think we can do that. Yeah. Here we go. Let me see how that comes out. Can you see that?
I can see
Yes.
it.
All right. So this is kind of a, I've shown that slide many times, but I don't think I can show it enough because I think there's a lot of confusion around AI and terminology in general. So if we start with the, can you see my mouse when I pound or?
No, I don't see your mouse.
I do not see your mouse, but I do see the screen that you're presenting.
Yeah. So if you start with the outer ring, basically, this is artificial intelligence. This is everything. It's actually an old artificial intelligence is something that started, I think, as early as the 50s, right? And Alan Turing already started talking about artificial intelligence. The Turing test, I'm sure you've heard about it, which is a really good test to determine whether it's a machine or a human you're talking to. So the term artificial intelligence was already there, back in the 50s. And then in, I think, 60s, 70s, there was this rule-based system, which were like very primitive versions of, attempts to emulate the human intelligence. That's always been the goal, right? And you had this, inference system where like some rule-based system, and there was some data, and nobody uses that anymore. That was pre-machine learning. Then this machine learning thing was kind of, already in the 80s, there were the first machine learning research that was done by there, which is about basically generating algorithm based on data, as opposed to traditional, coding where you write code. The idea with machine learning is that you have a lot of data and you train on the data, and then you create the training create the algorithm, as opposed to you as a developer writing the algorithm in code, right? And then there's deep learning, which is like yet a subset of machine learning, which in a sense, regular machine learning, which is not deep learning, you kind of have some preset rules. You have some ideas of how the rules should be. Well, deep learning, you don't. You just say it's, you kind of simulate, try to simulate the human brain, at least. At least that's the idea behind it. You give it a lot of data, and then the algorithm that comes out of it, you have no idea what this algorithm would look like, before it's actually created by machine learning, right? By deep learning.
So with your slide that you're showing, we have many rings, and so it's almost a bunch of circles, or it's a circle with rings, narrowing it down. But the outer layer is artificial intelligence, which is the forms you explained. Then there's machine learning, and now we're talking about deep learning.
Exactly.
To put this in a little perspective, you started mentioning timelines and time frames, and you said the 80s. What I thought about was chess.
Yeah.
Right? So at which portion was chess where you could play against the computer?
Yes.
Is that part of any of these learnings?
Yes, absolutely. So chess and Go later was also one of the challenges that was picked up. So there has been several versions of it, as far as I know. I don't want to give you some historically wrong data here, but as far as I remember, you can look it up. But I think some of the very first based chess thing were actually rule based systems, right? And I think some of the first one were actually beat the humans were actually machine learning based systems. So as just check the facts. I mean, don't take my but you're absolutely right. These were some of the first attempts to some of the challenges that were picked up for trying to emulate the human intelligence. But they are all I think what's important to understand is that these are all subset of each other. So AI is a very, very big field, right? Which contains a lot of things. And machine learning is a small field. Deep learning is even smaller. Not smaller in terms of in terms of how much research going on, but it's like subsets of it, right? And generative AI, which what everybody's talking about today, is yet a subset of deep learning, right? So it's about generating new content, right? As opposed to deep learning. So I'll give you an example. Self-driving car, they are using either machine learning or deep learning technology, but they're not generating anything. They're not generating new content. They are driving the car. Basically, they perform certain actions like braking, accelerating, turning, based on the data they receive. But they train not to generate new things. They train to trigger this action at the right moment in the right sequence and all that. This is not generative AI. Generative AI is about generating new content. And then within generative AI, there are different models to generate different things. So, for example, GPT models are typically used to language. So these are large language models. So ChatGPT, like that everybody talks about, is a application of large language model, which is a chat application. So you're chatting. But there are other large language model applications which are not chatting. For example, our marketing text generation in BC is not a chat experience, but it's still using LLM behind the scenes, right? And then you have DALI, things like DALI, which generate image. They are like a different type of generative AI. They are not made to generate language, but they're made to generate images, right? And you have some which are less known, but are made to generate music. For example, music is a very structured thing, so it's kind of obvious to have models to generate music. There are people out there doing research with that. They have models that generate symphonies, which are hardly distinguishable from some things which are composed by humans. Right?
I tried one of those the other day. We had a conversation with Kenny at the conference, and he showed us a song that he played. I think it was Sonu or which one was Chris?
Suno.ai.
Suno. I forget the names of some of these. I have the link listed, but it's amazing the content that you can create with the image generation, the music generation, and even I used 11 Labs to record audio of voice and then play back if somebody was talking with it. Again, I don't know where that would fall within the AI realm, but to create content with the likeness of someone's voice, I was impressed, even with the inflection of the voice, the pausing, the commas. It's just amazing what we can do.
Not philosophical, but I mean, it's we human react very emotionally about these things because we have this idea, I think, that creativity was kind of the last area that we had for ourselves. Like the machines are good at a lot of things. Like, they calculate faster than us. They do a lot of things better than they can handle a lot more data than we can. But we can still be creative, But now we are starting seeing some signs that maybe the machines can do that too, which is a little bit a little bit maybe distressing for us.
It has its own challenges, and I think with the newness of it, it will find its place.
Sure. Yeah.
I think the dust will settle where it will, as always happens. But right now, I know from myself even included, all the presentations, I used to use stock images. I had some services in my last set of presentations. I was like, Copilot, create me an image of a person doing this, and great image, put it on the slide. So
I use a tool. I use a tool to build a PowerPoint presentation, 8 slides, and it was like I had 2 hours to prepare. I just gave it some context, and it generated 8 slides for me with all the context. It's fascinating.
There's no doubt that it's really a game changer. It's really a revolution. Truly. And then just to conclude on that slide, then within generative AI, there's large language models, which are only for languages, or primarily originally designed for languages. People are using it for other things, but basically it's made to be used originally for languages. So this kind of when people say AI these days, actually most of the time they mean LLMs. I just wanted to kind of lift that conversation. And then there's Copilot. So Copilot is a brand name, is a Microsoft brand name, which doesn't refer to any of these rings in particular, but it's just a brand name for everything that has to do with AI in general. So when we say Copilot feature in BC, for example, that could very well be a machine learning feature which has nothing to do with large language model, in a sense, right? So I hope that makes sense. So just to kind of try to live a little
This
bit
is
of
this is
confusion
great.
around it, because people use these terms, and it's fine. People use these terms. They use LLM when they mean they use AI, but they mean actually LLM. They use Copilot when they mean actually a chat experience. And it's all a little bit confusing. But
No, it is,
very
because how
fascinating
it's
area. So
no, it is. It's interesting because the words are used interchangeably, and I myself have fallen into that because your slide depicted it perfectly. Artificial intelligence is a large group, and then as you like, each of the areas were smaller subsets of artificial intelligence. So technically, it still is artificial intelligence, but we're talking about a specific portion. An LLM is a portion of artificial intelligence, but doesn't encompass in totality artificial intelligence.
Precisely. And there's still room. I mean, the other type of AI technologies still have their place. Especially in the world of ERP, where we are a lot about numbers. So I just want to say that machine learning is still a good thing. Not all problems are necessarily good solving with LLM based technologies, right? You want to crunch numbers and do like we have had for a while now. It's not a very well known feature, but we've had demand forecasting and late payment prediction. This kind of AI, which are machine learning based features in BC, and they have been there for several years. Before LLM was a thing, before everybody talked about LLM, right? And they are still very valid. So LLM is good for anything which has to do with languages, or manipulating text. It's very good for that. You can also use it for other things, but if you start developing feature with, and my advice is, if you want to start developing features using LLM technology, try to go for something which has something to do with language somehow, because that's where you'll see you'll see how you can use it in the most efficient way. Don't use it to crush numbers. The LLMs are not good at crushing numbers, or asking. You can trip them very easily. There's tons of examples out there. Ask. I stumbled across one the other day. You can try it out yourself on ChatGPT or Bing. You say, this patient blood pressure was so and so at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the pulse was so and so at 12 o'clock. The patient died at 1 o'clock p.m. Is the patient alive? And try this out, and you'll see the LLM get confused. Right? It's a very simple question for anybody, any human, to answer. Right? No, the question is the patient alive at 5 o'clock p.m. Right? Something like that. Right? So there's a bunch of things that confuses the LLM here. One is the timeline. They are not very good at when we hear this statement as human, we visualize the timeline of things, like 8 a.m. this happened, 12 a.m. this happened, 1 a.m. the patient died, 5 a.m. the patient is dead, right? That we kind of visualize the timing. LLMs are not good at that. They're basically big statistical engine that predict the next word, right? So in that, there's not a lot of time dimension, right? And then another thing that I believe confuses them with that kind of thing is they are trained on the internet. They're trained, and what they see a lot on the internet is, things about, the patient has these symptoms, what are the risks of the patient getting to heart failure, and this kind of, there's a lot of this content on the internet. So the type of answer you get is like, depending on the signs, it's hard to determine whether the patient is alive or not, and and then you get that if you have, and then you always get the warning, like if you have a health problem, please contact your
Call
physician.
911.
Which is also kind of interesting.
I will say though, the Copilot on Business Central was very fascinating because you can ask specific questions about, give me the top 3 open sales order for so and so client. And I think one of the things that was, someone had asked me a few questions the first time them seeing Copilot in Business Central is about what's your most profitable item, right? Give me the top 3 of my profitable item, and it did give them that. Where it hung up was, give me inventory turns and what would it look like in the next week, right? And of course, it took you to the analysis page, but it didn't really quite get you there. But I would assume in the near future, I mean, that's going to get better and better. But it was very fascinating to see how people are starting to try it out in different scenarios.
Yeah. So just about these features, I mean, I think we have a bunch of presentation about it. I think they're also on our YouTube channel, but basically what's happening under the hood is, when you ask that kind of question in BC, it's not designed that way that we take that request and send it off to the LLM. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of prompting. So we have basically some prompts that you don't see, which are basically Microsoft IP, right? Because this is what the feature is, right? It's like the equivalent of source code. These days, when you talk about LLM features, that's your prompt, right? And there's a lot of work that goes into prompt engineering. We can talk about that if you're interested. But basically, we have these prompts, and we kind of weaved into it the user requests, and then there might be several. There might be a little conversation going on. We send the first prompt, and then you get an answer, and then you might send a new request to the LLM. So it might be 4 or 5 round tripping to the LLM with several prompts which are pre-baked under the hood, and where we weave the information that comes from your requests into our prompts, right, to get the proper answer. So it's kind of, and on top of that, there's the whole responsible AI thing. So we add things like, you shouldn't answer anything that can be offensive, or anything which can be the things you don't want to show up on the user interface. So there are all sorts of things going on there that kind of put some guardrail around the prompting, right? So if if you deploy an Azure OpenAI service and go and try it out and ask the question, you're not going to get any answer about BC at all. It doesn't know anything about BC, so it needs to be informed about all these things, right? So, and that's how most LLM features are built, and it's getting. I mean, what we see since we started working on that, it's getting more and more complex. And you have to ask yourself at all time, am I using the right tool to solve
Yes.
a particular problem? Not all problems should be solved using LLMs, right?
That's one of the questions that I had. I also would like to go back to the point that you had mentioned about stumping the AI. I see a lot of it. I use that as the tool example. I think it's more fear-based, where everyone goes, haha, I want to make it where 1 + 1 is 3, versus using the tool appropriately. So now with Copilot, you had mentioned use large language models for language. And then you have deep learning and statistical number crunching and the other forms of AI that we spoke with. With the AI Copilot Studio within Business Central, and again, a lot of this is for those that may not be familiar with it, does it choose the proper model based upon the prompt that you send it? For example, if I want it to crunch numbers, as Kris had mentioned, show me the best sales item, or show me what is the average balance for a customer over a period of time. Does it use a statistical engine? Or if I ask it something language related to generate text or to come up with text, does the Copilot engine, I don't even know what you would call it technically, does the Copilot engine know how to differentiate between statistical versus language?
Yeah, it's to some extent, yes. In that sense that, so the way you, there's this concept of skills or plugins, or these names keep changing. But so basically, what you use, the way you build a feature like this is that you use, so your starting point is some natural language, right? In a chat, and especially in a chat experience, which is your scenario, you're asking something, typically in a chat pane, right? So the first thing is to identify the user intent. That's usually most of the prompting. It's a common technique. The first prompt to send to the LM is that the user case is saying that what's the user intent, and then you get something which is more structured, than anything that because the user can write anything in the prompt, right? And you can even limit it further. So you can build just to give you an example, and we're getting into the art and science of prompt engineering. But you could imagine and this is, by the way, common use technique. You want to limit what you want the user to do. So you take the text that the user enter in the prompt, which can be basically anything from a real request to something completely crazy, right? And you send it to them, and you ask them what does the user want, and you can only answer one of these possibilities. There are only three things the user can ask in that prompt, and if it's anything, what is it 1, 2, or 3, or something else, right? Like, is it I don't know, you can imagine any example, right? Let's say BC can only do these three things, right? And then the LM they are very good at that. They will identify, okay, does the user want 1, I don't know, get the last 10 customers, or 2, get the latest, what's my best customer, or 3, pick your feature. And if it's anything else, it will tell you this is none of these three things, because this is all about understanding the language and the meaning, right? And then you can choose, when you implement that feature, you can choose, say, okay, I can't help you. If it's none of these three things, I can't answer your question. And that's kind of what we do in some of the prompt engineering, try to limit, because otherwise, you can ask everything, right? And then there's this concept, back to your question about, what model is. So at that level, when you develop a feature like that, there's this concept of skills. So once you identify the user intent, you tell the LLM, so here's the skills I have. I can, calculate, some statistics, which might be, in the end, some piece of AI code running somewhere, right? Or I can, look up in the database, and here's the schema, here's the, the kind of query you can write. These are the things I can do. And then you ask the LM, now I've figured out that's what the user wants. Here's the tool you have, and give me a plan, right? And then we answer, you have to call these methods with these parameters, and then you can kind of validate that plan and execute it. So there is this very common technique which is called function calling, which is more and more prevalent in the world of LLM. And the principle of it is very powerful, because that allows you to ground a lot of the things you can do with LLM. So, prevent the LLM to go crazy and hallucinate and do all sorts of things you shouldn't do. So basically, the idea is that you give it an API, which might be a real one or a fake one, doesn't matter. You give the LLM an API, and you tell the LLM, here's an API, and here's what the user wants to do. Might be in natural language. How do I do that with the API? And keep in mind, LLM have been trained on the internet, so they've seen a lot of API. They've seen a lot of APIs, and they've seen a lot of JSON. You can also give it some JSON structure and say, hey, here's what the user wants to do. How do I do that? Put that into a JSON structure, right? And LMs are very good at that because they've seen a lot of these things, right? And so it will answer you with an API or a JSON structure. And the good thing about it is that you can validate it. For example, let's say some JSON you get back. You can validate it. You can run some code on it and say, okay, does the JSON have the right values? If the values of that particular field can be 1, 2, and 3 only, then if it's 4, then you can say, okay, that's the wrong answer. Then you can ask the LLM again, right? Until you get the proper results. So these are the techniques that people use when you do prompt engineering, right? And the same for API. You're sure when you run this API, you're in control then of what's executing. You only ask the LLM what methods, what should I call, which parameter in which order, and then as a developer in that feature, you control what's happening, which is a lot better. That allows you to prevent all sorts of things to happen.
That is really under the hood. I have, you've sparked so many questions in my head about this. I think we could talk about this all day, but I do think we're at the tip of the iceberg of the functionality and how to use it effectively. I think a lot of individuals are what I call playing with it now, just testing. It's almost like a child walking. They learn how to step, they learn how to taste things. So I think it will.
Yeah, my recommendation, if you want to get serious about LLM and do serious things about it, start using our toolkit. Read about prompt engineering. There's tons of resources out there, Microsoft and otherwise. That this is a generic thing, which it's not specific to one technology. Whether you use a Copilot or things from other competitors, if you feel so inclined, this prompt engineering is prompt engineering, and I would recommend any developer to get acquainted with it as a minimum, because it seems that it's come here to stay. And this is a very different way of thinking than traditional programming. Very different. There are techniques. There are things that people have experimented with, which works very well. One that I recommend to everybody, which is the simplest one to deploy, is what's called a few shot learning. So if you ask a question to the LLM and expect an answer, it will give you an answer. But if you want a better answer, LLM are very good if they've seen examples. So the idea is that here's a question. I want you to answer that particular question. Here are some examples of question and answers, which are, valid ones, right? And then when the LLM sees that, it's getting a lot better at answering. It's called few shotting, and the more examples, the better, right? But at least when you provide 4 or 5 examples of the things you want to ask and how it could be answered, then the LLMs get very good at answering. So just one simple technique that everybody can use. There are tons of examples out there. But then so advice number 1: read about prompt engineering. Try it out, and don't try it out. When I say try it out, don't go to. Everybody's played with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is a chat experience, right? It's an application built on top of an LLM with a specific purpose, right? If you want to try it out from a developer standpoint, you want to go to Azure OpenAI, deploy an endpoint, deploy a model there, and go to Azure OpenAI Studio. And then it has everything you need to try your prompts, right? And that's basically where you spend most of your time when you develop an LLM features, because the coding is nothing. There's not a lot of coding. The work is in the prompt, right? And then you can go and play with it. That you can try. If you have an idea, if you have an idea of an LLM feature, that's the first place to go to try out whether it's at all doable with an LLM, right? Try to figure out what prompt it should be, experiment with it, play around with it, try different prompt engineering techniques, and the rest is just code, right? It's easy. That part we know.
No, yes, that is. It goes back. I remember first working with AI with the cognitive services, with the photos, just detecting someone's disposition, what was in the photo, whether it was food, person, even trying to guess their age. It's been some time. So all those tools are available. So there are a lot of options, but it goes back to my first point of, we started on this. Will there be a point, or do you see a point within Business Central, if you can say, where it will be that, we have the setup checklist now, we have the banner, we have the tools, the guided tour, we have a number of different options to guide the customer through the setup experience and the learning experience. Do you see an expansion of that within the application?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have a tremendous opportunity with Business Central and ERP in general, because ERP systems are traditionally hard to use. Right? They're complex. There's a lot of rules. There's a lot of, things you need to know. And I think, a lot of the time when I see a potential, like the scenario described, but any other things basically within ERP, we all seen it from end users. They know what they want to do, right? They want to do an invoice and give a discount and do a return or some scenario, and then for some reason they can't manage to do it because it's just too complicated, right? And then they have to, I'm sure you've seen it, and they have to call this guy, their colleague who's good with it, and he's done it, and he knows how to do it, right? And the idea with copilots is that the copilot can end up being this guy, instead of having to call Jim or John, which is your colleague who is very good with the RP and with BC, and we're going to help you, do whatever you're stranded on. Then you can ask Copilot, hey Copilot, I've done that. I'm trying to do a sales quote here, but then I have trouble with doing a discount for this thing and not this one. Whatever scenario you get, you get stranded with, and then Copilot will tell you, hey, you have to do this and this and that, or it'll do it for you. Yeah,
that's where I was getting at as far as the initial.
I think we're getting there. We're getting there, and I think there's tremendous potential for that, and helping people spend less time in BC, because in the end it needs to be something that help people do their business. They should spend more time than needed. In BC,
an ERP application is a tool.
Exactly.
I will say that even with GitHub Copilot, the time savings that I get with AL coding is significant, because a lot of the tasks that I would spend time typing, I call it snippets on steroids, but it's a lot more than that, because it does properly fill out actions. It does properly.
That's what I hear from everybody.
I had mentioned to Kris and a few others at one point, my ultimate test where I was shocked is I had a page with a table that I had XML ports to import and export data for testing. This was not a production scenario for a customer. It was for testing of some data management. And I created the XML ports. I created the table to import the data to, and then I went to do the page, and it added all the fields. And then I started to do the actions for the XML ports, and it did an import for the two imports that I had. Did the import for the one import I had and the two exports that I had. And then I went to add a delete, and it wrote a delete action, and even added are you sure you want to delete the record? Question. That went from something that I would have spent, a half hour writing to literally minutes. And it saved so much time, and that's just one small scale.
I think if it's, as long as it takes care of 80% of your tedious work and just focusing on the actual end result and a little bit more complex areas, it saves you a lot of time for sure.
And that's the key, is the 80%, because like with anything, I want to stress and emphasize even what you had mentioned: verify. So just because it put the actions in there, it didn't mean it was correct. It actually was in this case, but I still had to take the time to verify that it was created properly. And in some cases, I could just move the lines around to put it. I was just shocked.
And think about
it's getting better and better.
I mean, think about it. This is just the beginning, right? Because first of all, these large languages, they haven't seen a lot of AI, as opposed to other languages.
Yes.
You should hear what people who code in things like Python or JavaScript. There's tons of JavaScript out there. It's factor 10 to compare to AL, because it hasn't seen a lot of AL. Right? There's not a lot of AI in the internet compared to other languages. Right? That's one thing. But still, it's still pretty good at it, as you mentioned. Right? Some of it comes from the fact that it does resemble other languages. But the other thing is that I want to mention is that this is we're still on GPT-4, right? And there's new models coming out soon. And as I understand, each model is kind of a quantum leap from the previous one. So it's probably
who knows what this will be.
What's going to come out.
It's a big scary thing.
Can you imagine Business Central talking back to you, like when you in the future, right?
Why not?
Why not?
I see it doing so much. And with that, Vincent, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. I could honestly speak with you for the rest of the day. I understand you have a busy schedule. I know you have a lot of responsibility and a lot of great members on your team, along with other members of the other team. I always like to say that there are a lot of great members on the whole Business Central team that don't have that public facing, I guess you could say, responsibility, but they also work with a great product that many, as you mentioned, hundreds and thousands of users use within the world. So it's not just isolated to one particular area. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it. Before that, if anyone has any additional questions or comments to learn more about Business Central under the hood, learn a little bit more about your team or AI in general, is there a way that someone could get in contact with you?
Sure. Yeah, you can. Under the 100 Hood series is on YouTube, so you can feel free to write comments there in the comment section. And I mean, if you have in the Brio side platform, is there a possibility for comments as well? I'll be happy to answer requests from people. I mean, and people can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'd be happy to answer any of the questions. And then I'm usually there at all the BC conferences, so feel free to come and talk.
Absolutely. Thank you. We will put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. We'll also on the webpage put a screenshot of the image that you had shared, if that's okay. It will show up on the YouTube recording, but we'll put that for those that listen and want to reference it later. We'll put that screenshot up with the episode. And again, thank you very much. I hope you have a good afternoon.
Thank you for having this podcast.
We appreciate you.
Thank you, Vincent. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, Kris, for your time for another episode of In the Dynamics Corner Chair. And thank you to our guests for participating.
Thank you, Brad, for your time. It is a wonderful episode of Dynamics Corner Chair. I would also like to thank our guests for joining us. Thank you for all of our listeners tuning in as well. You can find Brad at developerlife.com. That is DVLPRLIFE.com. And you can interact with them via Twitter, DVLPRLIFE. You can also find me at matalino.io, MATALINO.io. And my Twitter handle is Matalino16. And you can see those links down below in the show notes. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, and take care.